One of hip-hop's most recognizable moguls has suddenly found himself at the center of a controversy that has social media questioning everything people believed about the fortune behind his larger-than-life image. A staggering $70 million figure is now dominating online conversations as fans debate the financial situation surrounding Rick Ross and the businesses tied to his name. But before anyone jumps to conclusions, there's one thing you need to keep in mind. When someone whose entire reputation was built on wealth, luxury, and the image of being the ultimate boss starts getting linked to money problems, people pay attention immediately. And whether every claim turns out to be true or not, the internet has already turned this into one of the hottest discussions in hip-hop. So today, we're breaking down every angle of the story. What's good, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If this is your first time here, you're in the right place, because we don't just repeat headlines, we dig beneath them, separate facts from speculation, and uncover details that often get overlooked. That's exactly what we're doing today, as we take a closer look at Rick Ross, one of rap's biggest personalities and one of the most carefully crafted brands hip-hop has ever seen. He built an empire where success, luxury, and larger-than-life living became part of his identity, inspiring countless artists to follow the same blueprint. But now, instead of talking about his cars, mansions, or business moves, people are asking whether that empire is beginning to show signs of weakness. The debate that's taking over the internet right now comes down to one simple question. Is Rick Ross actually facing serious financial trouble, or are people completely misunderstanding how celebrity wealth really works? Stick around until the very end, because once we connect all the pieces, you'll see this entire situation from a perspective that most people haven't even considered. To understand why Rick Ross is suddenly at the center of this conversation, we have to go back to where the story really began. This was never the journey of an artist who accidentally landed a hit record and rode a wave of luck. Rick Ross carefully built one of the most recognizable and calculated brands hip-hop has ever seen. Born William Leonard Roberts II, he came up in Carroll City, Florida, a place that certainly wasn't known for handing out luxury lifestyles or millionaire opportunities. Instead, he studied the game, watched how power was presented, and created a larger-than-life character that became so believable the music industry fully bought into it. When Hustlin' exploded in 2006, it wasn't simply another successful single. It announced the arrival of a man determined to build an empire. Everything about the record sounded expensive. His commanding voice demanded attention, while the signature look, the beard, the heavyweight chains, the piles of cash and jewelry that looked almost unreal, completed the image. Every piece fit together perfectly to introduce a version of hip-hop fans hadn't quite experienced before. Rick Ross wasn't just talking about wealth in his lyrics. He made luxury feel like his everyday reality. Every performance, every feature, and every interview added another layer to a brand that looked almost impossible to shake. Then came the business moves that made the image feel even more believable. Maybach Music Group evolved into a respected label that helped launch and develop multiple successful artists under his leadership. His investment in Wingstop quickly became one of his signature business success stories, with reports claiming he owned dozens of franchise locations, further strengthening his reputation as more than just a rapper. His collection of luxury cars became part of the legend itself. Rolls-Royces, Lamborghinis, and Maybachs filled the garages of multiple properties across the South, reinforcing the lifestyle fans had come to expect. Then there was his massive Fayetteville, Georgia estate, famously known as the Promised Land, a property so enormous that people would drive by simply to catch a glimpse from outside the gates. With well over 100 rooms, multiple swimming pools, and enough land to become a landmark in conversations about celebrity real estate, it represented excess on another level. He wore diamond chains worth more than many people earn over several years, and whenever he stepped onto a stage, the jewelry alone carried insurance policies that most people could hardly imagine. For years, Rick Ross constantly shared photos and videos from private jets, to the point where fans simply assumed flying private was just part of his everyday routine. As long as the records kept selling, the tours stayed booked, and major artists continued lining up to work with him, almost nobody had a reason to question the lifestyle he was presenting. This was the version of Rick Ross that dominated hip-hop. Just looking at him was enough for people to believe he was operating on a completely different financial level, and very few ever stopped to ask for proof. But this is where the story takes an unexpected turn, because the same internet that helped build the big boss image eventually became the first place to challenge it. Surprisingly, the conversation didn't begin with leaked court documents or a blockbuster financial investigation. Instead, it started the way so many viral stories do today, with one seemingly ordinary moment that meant nothing on its own, but suddenly looked much bigger once people connected it to everything else they thought they knew. Rick Ross was photographed flying on a commercial airline, reportedly seated in economy class, and within hours, social media had turned it into a full-blown discussion. Now, take a second because this part matters. Choosing to fly commercial doesn't automatically mean someone is struggling financially. Plenty of millionaires do it every single day for practical reasons, whether it's easier scheduling, convenience, or simply because chartering private jets non-stop costs far more than most people realize. But when your entire public image has been built around unlimited luxury and never settling for less than the best, seeing Rick Ross sitting in a regular airline seat created a completely different perception. It wasn't really about the flight itself, it was about what that image represented. And when your reputation is built on projecting success, even one moment that appears to contradict that image can quickly become a major talking point. The reactions online were ruthless, not because everyone suddenly cared about his bank account, but because once social media senses even the smallest crack in a celebrity's image, the jokes usually come fast. Memes flooded every platform, punchlines spread everywhere, and people who had quietly questioned his finances before suddenly felt comfortable saying those thoughts publicly. Almost overnight, the conversation changed from whether Rick Ross was still making quality music to whether he was still living the billionaire-style lifestyle he had been promoting for nearly 2 decades. And once that debate caught momentum, people started digging through everything. They revisited the timeline, looked at the gaps between his biggest releases, and even compared how often his name dominated hip-hop conversations today versus 5 or even 10 years ago, convinced they might have missed signs that had been there all along. That's when people began asking tougher questions. Were all of Rick Ross's business investments actually performing as well as everyone believed, or was the public only seeing the highlight reel? Fans started revisiting older reports that had quietly faded from the spotlight but never completely disappeared. Stories involving tax issues, legal battles, and financial obligations suddenly resurfaced, making many wonder whether maintaining that billionaire image was costing far more than anyone realized. Now let's talk about the tax situation, because this is where the conversation becomes much more specific. Over the years, multiple reports claimed that Rick Ross had been hit with significant IRS tax liens. It's important to understand that owing taxes doesn't automatically mean someone is broke. It doesn't even guarantee they're facing financial collapse. It simply means the government says money is owed and has begun the legal process of collecting it. But once those figures become public, especially when they involve millions of dollars, people immediately start connecting the dots. Those tax-related headlines have followed Rick Ross more than once throughout his career, and every time they resurface, they fuel the growing narrative that maybe his empire isn't as untouchable as it appears from the outside. Here's what many people watching from social media never fully appreciate about maintaining an ultra-luxury lifestyle. It's not just expensive, it demands constant spending. A massive estate like the Promised Land doesn't simply exist without ongoing costs. There are employees to pay, endless maintenance, landscaping, repairs, and utility bills large enough to make most commercial buildings look modest. Then come insurance costs covering luxury vehicles, expensive jewelry, and the property itself. On top of that, there's private security and countless other expenses most fans never even think about. And that's before you consider the pressure to constantly post content showing the lifestyle, because the second the private jets, luxury watches, and exotic cars disappear from the timeline, people immediately start asking questions. Ironically, what you don't post can become just as big of a story as what you do post. That's the hidden downside of building a brand around non-stop luxury. Rick Ross understood exactly what he was doing, because that larger-than-life image was always central to his success. His brand wasn't just about making hit records, it was about creating an identity that extended far beyond music itself. But when your reputation depends on looking like someone with unlimited wealth, even the smallest moment that challenges that perception can quickly become front-page gossip. And once several of those moments begin stacking together, the internet starts creating its own storyline, whether every piece actually fits or not. Now let's address the conversation surrounding the reported $70 million in seized assets, because this is where context becomes incredibly important. Headlines claiming tens of millions of dollars in assets have been seized are exactly the kind of stories that explode across social media before anyone stops to read the details. The truth is, the phrase asset seizure can describe several very different legal situations depending on the circumstances. It could involve assets temporarily frozen during litigation, property targeted by tax authorities over unpaid obligations, or efforts to enforce a court judgment after a lawsuit. None of those situations automatically prove that someone has gone broke or lost everything they own. But here's where celebrity culture changes everything. Even if the real explanation is far more complicated than the viral headline suggests, most people never make it that far. Once stories about alleged asset seizures get combined with photos of Rick Ross flying commercial and conversations about him not dominating the charts the way he once did, public perception starts moving much faster than the actual facts. And at that point, many people stop waiting to hear the complete story. That's when people stop waiting for answers and begin writing the ending themselves. In their version of the story, it looks like one of hip-hop's greatest success stories is slowly unraveling. But there's another piece of this puzzle we can't ignore, and that's the role of 50 Cent. Anytime Rick Ross's finances become a trending topic, it's almost impossible to leave 50 Cent out of the conversation, because nobody has challenged Ross's image more consistently over the years. Their rivalry has become one of the longest-running and most entertaining feuds in hip-hop history, and if you followed it closely, you already know it was never just about records or diss tracks. It has always been a battle over reputation, authenticity, and who controls the public narrative. 50 Cent, who has mastered the art of social media trolling better than almost anyone in entertainment, figured out early that attacking Rick Ross's image would hit harder than attacking his music. Instead of focusing only on songs, he repeatedly targeted the very foundation of the Boss brand. Year after year, 50 posted jokes about Ross's weight, his spending habits, his business moves, and his finances. Much of it was obviously meant to be funny, but after years of repeating the same themes, those jokes started planting real questions in people's minds, even when there wasn't any major news involving Rick Ross. Every time another financial headline appeared, 50 was usually right there with another meme, another caption, or another viral post that pushed the conversation even further in front of millions of followers. Whether people think that's fair is another discussion entirely, but there's no denying those posts influenced how many fans viewed Rick Ross's financial situation. Here's what makes 50's strategy so effective. He rarely attacks something that can be disproved quickly without forcing the other person into an awkward position. If Ross responds by showing off more luxury cars or expensive watches, critics simply say he's trying too hard to prove a point. If he stays quiet, some people interpret the silence as confirmation. And if he fires back directly, he only gives the story even more attention. It's the kind of trap that's incredibly difficult to escape once you're caught inside it. Rick Ross has been dealing with that dynamic for years, including periods when there was no real evidence suggesting his finances were in trouble. Even during stable moments, public opinion was still being influenced by someone with an enormous platform and every reason to keep those questions alive. That brings us to the bigger issue that many fans misunderstand about celebrity wealth. Most people see the mansion, the Maybach, and the jewelry, then immediately assume every one of those assets is fully paid for and backed by unlimited cash sitting in the bank. What they don't see are business loans, financing agreements, record label contracts, management commissions, touring expenses, production costs, legal bills, and the non-stop price of maintaining a superstar image. The truth is, celebrity wealth is almost never as simple as it looks on social media. And it definitely doesn't mean someone has hundreds of millions of dollars sitting in a checking account, ready to spend whenever they feel like buying another luxury car. That's why net worth is so widely misunderstood. It's simply an estimate of someone's assets after subtracting their liabilities, including real estate, businesses, music catalogs, investments, and other holdings. What it doesn't tell you is how much liquid cash is actually available at any given moment. Someone with a reported $50 million net worth could have most of that value locked inside properties, business ownership, or long-term investments, while also dealing with taxes and operating costs that constantly reduce available cash. That doesn't mean they're broke. It simply means wealth on paper and money available to spend are two completely different things. Rick Ross is a perfect example of why this distinction matters. His Wingstop franchises carry real value, but they're operating businesses with employees, expenses, and ongoing overhead, not giant stacks of cash waiting to be withdrawn. The same goes for his real estate portfolio. Those properties may be worth millions, but they also require maintenance, taxes, and the right market conditions before they can easily be sold for cash. His music catalog is another valuable asset, yet the income it generates depends on streaming numbers, licensing opportunities, publishing revenue, and continued audience demand. None of that automatically points to financial trouble. It simply shows that the reality is much more complicated than either his biggest supporters or his harshest critics usually admit. Now let's shift back to the music itself, because that's another major piece of this conversation. During the first half of his career, Rick Ross delivered a run of albums that kept him at the center of hip-hop culture. Projects like Port of Miami, Trilla, Deeper Than Rap, and Teflon Don arrived during a period when Ross was one of the most influential voices in the industry. Artists wanted him on their records because his presence immediately elevated the song. His unmistakable voice became a staple on some of DJ Khaled's biggest anthems, and his verses regularly dominated clubs across the country. That level of cultural dominance translated into massive earnings from album sales, touring, features, endorsements, and business opportunities that naturally followed. But while Rick Ross continued making music, the business around music changed dramatically. Streaming completely reshaped how artists generate revenue, replacing the larger payouts that once came from physical albums and digital downloads. Playlist-driven listening also shifted mainstream tastes away from the grand, luxury-focused style that helped define Ross's rise. Hip-hop itself evolved, embracing different sounds, different personalities, and a new generation of stars. Ross continued releasing projects that his loyal fan base respected, but commercially, the numbers no longer matched the peak years of 2010 or 2012. That's not a sign of failure, it's simply the natural cycle that almost every veteran artist experiences over time. What it does mean, however, is that the music side of his income doesn't look the same as it did during the height of his career. And that naturally brings us to another major source of revenue that deserves a closer look: touring. At the height of his career, Rick Ross was commanding headline performances that brought in massive paychecks. Festival appearances, international tours, and nationwide runs alongside some of the biggest names in music created a revenue stream that could easily support an extravagant lifestyle, even when record label payouts became more complicated. But there's another side to touring that fans rarely think about. Private flights, luxury hotels, road crews, security teams, stage production, hospitality requirements, and marketing expenses all take a significant bite out of those earnings before the artist ever sees the final profit. And as an artist's demand rises and falls with changing trends, those tour profits can fluctuate dramatically from one year to the next. Outside of music, however, Rick Ross has continued strengthening his business portfolio through endorsements and brand partnerships. In fact, many industry observers believe those ventures now generate some of his most reliable income.
His investment in Wingstop has been widely discussed for years and is generally viewed as one of his smartest business moves, although the exact number of restaurants he currently owns and how much they generate isn't public information. Beyond that, he's partnered with liquor brands, clothing companies, and several other commercial ventures that keep his name active in business circles, even when he's no longer dominating the music charts like he once did. The important detail most people overlook is that the financial terms behind those deals remain private. So while everything may appear incredibly successful from the outside, the actual profit margins could look very different behind the scenes. One thing that's hard to argue against is that Rick Ross has become more prominent as a businessman than as a chart-topping artist in recent years. That's a transition many veteran rappers intentionally make, shifting their attention from chasing streaming records to building companies capable of generating wealth long after the spotlight fades. The real question, though, is whether Rick Ross made that shift entirely by choice or whether financial pressures helped shape that decision. And unless you're looking directly at his books, nobody outside his inner circle can answer that with certainty. That's exactly why speculation continues to fill every gap where facts are missing. Now let's step back and look at what this entire conversation really represents, because it's much bigger than one rapper's finances. At its core, this is a story about how hip-hop views wealth, status, and long-term success. Rap has always celebrated financial achievement, arguably more than any other genre, creating opportunities for black artists to showcase levels of success that previous generations rarely experienced publicly. But that same culture also creates enormous pressure to constantly appear richer than everyone else, even when maintaining that image becomes incredibly expensive. The result
is an environment where even artists who are genuinely wealthy can feel trapped by a lifestyle their public persona demands they continue displaying. Rick Ross didn't invent that formula, but he definitely became one of its biggest examples. Few artists leaned into the luxury image as completely as he did, leaving almost no room for any storyline other than total financial dominance. Every lyric, every interview, every music video, and nearly every social media post reinforced the exact same message: I'm the boss. I own the biggest houses, I drive the best cars, and I'm operating on another financial level entirely. After telling that story for nearly 20 years, even a small piece of information that appears to challenge it instantly becomes major news. Ironically, that's the price of building such a powerful brand. Nobody spends weeks analyzing the finances of rappers who never built their identity around limitless wealth. But Rick Ross made luxury the centerpiece of his career so consistently that stepping away from that image quietly is almost impossible. He either continues living up to those expectations or faces endless speculation that something behind the scenes has changed. And in today's social media era, where anyone with a smartphone can suddenly become an internet financial expert overnight, that scrutiny never really stops. There's also another point that deserves to be acknowledged, because it often gets lost in these conversations. Rick Ross isn't someone who stumbled into fame by accident or built a career that survived on luck alone. Throughout his career, he's overcome obstacles that could have permanently ended many other artists. He survived the correctional officer controversy during a time when authenticity meant everything in hip-hop. He endured years of public conflict with 50 Cent and still managed to keep releasing music that resonated with his audience. He also battled serious health scares that went far beyond entertainment headlines. Even after business setbacks, he continued expanding his portfolio instead of disappearing. Whatever his financial situation looks like today, and it's important to admit that none of us have access to the complete picture, his history shows a remarkable ability to recover from adversity. But surviving difficult situations doesn't protect anyone from public perception. And right now, public perception appears to be moving in a direction that Rick Ross and his team have either decided not to address directly or simply haven't found the right way to push back against yet. Every day that passes without Rick Ross or someone from his inner circle directly addressing these rumors gives social media another opportunity to shape the narrative on its own. And right now, the version of the story spreading online paints a picture of mounting financial pressure, cracks in the luxury image, and the possible decline of an empire that spent 2 decades looking almost untouchable. But before anyone rushes to a final conclusion, let's separate what we actually know from what people are assuming. Rick Ross undeniably built a legitimate empire. His record label was real, his real estate portfolio was real, his business investments were real, and his impact on hip-hop culture is impossible to deny. Whether every financial headline attached to his name over the years accurately reflected reality is an entirely different question. What isn't up for debate is that the foundation of his success wasn't manufactured. At the same time, it's equally true that maintaining an empire of that size requires non-stop revenue, careful financial management, and constant attention behind the scenes to support the luxurious lifestyle everyone sees on camera. The world where Rick Ross first built that empire is also very different from the one artists operate in today. The music business generates revenue differently, audiences consume content differently, and social media can build or destroy a reputation faster than anyone could have imagined back when hustlin' dominated television and radio. In an environment like that, even highly successful people can find themselves living one reality while the internet tells a completely different story. And after spending nearly 20 years carefully building one of hip-hop's most recognizable luxury brands, that gap between perception and reality becomes incredibly personal. So where does Rick Ross actually stand today? The honest answer is simple: we don't know with complete certainty. The widely discussed $70 million asset seizure claim still requires reliable sourcing and proper context before anyone can confidently accept it as fact. The commercial flight story happened, but by itself it doesn't prove financial collapse. The tax-related headlines have followed him for years, yet they haven't stopped him from continuing to operate his businesses. His business ventures are still active, even if the public doesn't know exactly how profitable they currently are. And while his music career isn't producing the same commercial numbers it did during its peak years, he's still releasing projects and maintaining a place within hip-hop culture. What has clearly changed, however, is the public conversation surrounding his finances. And when your public image is directly connected to your business opportunities, damage to that image can become a financial issue, regardless of what's actually sitting on the balance sheet. So is Rick Ross really running out of money, or is this simply another example of the internet taking scattered information and turning it into a much bigger story than the facts actually support? Right now, nobody outside his financial team can answer that with complete confidence. But one thing is undeniable. For someone who built an entire career around ownership, luxury, and the image of limitless success, even having this discussion publicly represents a major shift. His entire brand rested on the belief that the boss never came up short, the empire never showed weakness, the lifestyle never slowed down, and the private jets never gave way to commercial flights. Yet today, that very discussion has become the headline. It's generating millions of views, endless debate, and enough curiosity to make even casual hip-hop fans stop scrolling and pay attention. Whether this eventually proves to be the beginning of a real financial decline, another obstacle that Rick Ross overcomes like so many before it, or simply another viral internet narrative built on incomplete information, remains to be seen. But the bigger lesson goes far beyond Rick Ross himself. It's about what happens when a person's identity becomes inseparable from the image they've spent years creating. When the brand becomes the man, and the man becomes the brand, even the smallest crack in that image can be mistaken for total collapse. That's the challenge Rick Ross willingly accepted while building one of the most recognizable luxury brands in rap history. And now he's navigating it under the brightest spotlight social media has ever created. Until new information emerges, the culture will continue watching, the internet will continue connecting dots, whether they belong together or not. And eventually, Rick Ross will almost certainly respond in his own way. When that moment comes, it will likely reveal far more than anonymous rumors, leaked claims, or viral posts ever could. Until then, this story remains unfinished, and if there's one thing we've learned about the internet, it's that unfinished stories rarely stay quiet for long. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Rick Ross is genuinely dealing with serious financial problems, or is this simply another situation where the internet has turned speculation into perceived reality? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.